One of the most controversial game mechanics in Pokemon Go is, without a doubt, AR mapping tasks. Now, this is a controversial mechanic for a variety of different reasons, but I also think it can be quite rewarding for very little effort. And that's precisely what I want to talk about in this video. I'm going to be talking about AR mapping tasks, why they're controversial, and why you should still be doing them. Alright, what's happening everyone? Jinsula here with a brand new Pokemon Go video. I hope your day is going really well, and let's get right into it. So today we're going to be putting a focus on AR mapping tasks. This is something that has been a part of Pokemon Go for several years, and it is also one of those things that a lot of players tend to forget even exists. But the thing is, with AR mapping tasks, they're actually a great source for various rewards that you could pretty much only get from AR mapping tasks, and then on top of that, they are something that does require very little effort. But they're also a very controversial thing in Pokemon Go for a variety of different reasons, which we'll get into, and I think these sort of controversies are things that Niantic should not ignore. So yeah, essentially we could get very constructive and talk about how this one mechanic can improve. So yeah, I think this is going to be a very interesting video, especially because AR mapping tasks is essentially an aspect of Pokemon Go that has been kind of fallen by the wayside. People just don't tend to care about it, and I think maybe with this video, some players out there may actually start caring about it and actually start doing them. Now, before we continue, let's actually quickly talk about how AR mapping tasks work. If you go to certain Pokestops, you may notice in the corner it will say AR mapping, and if you happen to have no AR mapping tasks within your field research, spinning that Pokestop is going to give you an AR mapping task, and in order to complete that task and get yourself rewards, you will need to scan that Pokestop by clicking on the button that you will see under the photo disc. And if you were to scan that Pokestop and then upload it, you would get yourself those rewards. It's a very simple process, and if you get used to it, you'll be able to do it very quickly. It just makes sure you're in an area where you have good connection, because otherwise that upload of that scan could actually take really long, because for some reason, Niantic's network is pretty crummy when it comes to uploading AR mapping tasks. One thing I do to mitigate that is actually to upload later, and then when I get to a good signal area, that's when I'm going to upload them from the settings menu. And even if you're far away from that Pokestop, you'll still complete the AR mapping task, and you'll be able to collect the rewards from it. So yeah, that's essentially all you need to know regarding how you can complete AR mapping tasks, and I think this is a big thing that you should always consider doing. So let's start this off by talking about the various controversies around AR mapping tasks. Why are players so against doing them, or why are some players just feeling very negative when it comes to AR mapping tasks? Well, one of the things that a lot of players bring up is that this is essentially free labor. I think for a lot of people, they get very apprehensive when it comes to AR technology, mainly because over the years, Niantic has had a history of neglecting gameplay mechanics and bug fixes in order to push further along AR technology, and AR mapping is essentially us contributing to that. And I think some players have a very negative sentiment towards AR mapping tasks for that specific reason. However, I will say that over the years, Niantic has eased off a lot of AR mechanic designs, and they are starting to push a lot more gameplay mechanics as well as some bug fixes. And I think a part of that is actually because Niantic Games is now under the umbrella of Scopely Inc. So I think doing AR mapping tasks, it's essentially not a big deal. You're not necessarily contributing to certain design mechanics that are going to be irrelevant. I think they're just another form of getting yourself nice rewards at this point. Now, another reason why this is such a controversial game mechanic, and I think this is totally valid, but it puts players in an awkward or sometimes even a dangerous situation. Let me explain. First and foremost, if you're doing AR mapping tasks, you're essentially scanning a points of interest. And if you're doing that when there's a lot of people involved, especially children, it could look very awkward and it can make you look very creepy. So I think a lot of players avoid doing AR mapping tasks for that specific reason. It is something that does put you in a bit of a vulnerable state, especially if you're not in a safe area. And this is something I really do think Niantic needs to mitigate through in-game mechanics and certain restrictions as well. So yeah, these are essentially the main things that people have issue with when it comes to AR mapping tasks. And of course, there's plenty of other reasons why players just do not do any AR mapping, but I do think these are the two main issues. But I do think there are ways to mitigate some of these controversies and actually use AR mapping to your benefit. Let's actually go over that now. So why should you even bother doing AR mapping tasks? Well, I think the answer is quite obvious. You're getting yourself a lot of rewards for very little effort. So if you were to do AR mapping tasks regularly, you're going to end up with more Pokeballs, and you're going to end up with a particular item which typically you cannot get often in this game, and that is of course Poffins. Now, what is the big deal with Poffins? Well, when you use them on your buddy Pokemon, you're actually going to make that Pokemon excited. So you're going to get double the amount of hearts for the various buddy tasks, and you're also going to be able to get that Pokemon to best buddies much faster. So if you're doing AR mapping tasks constantly and stocking up on those Poffins, you're going to end up getting yourself a lot more best buddies, which is going to allow you to get that platinum medal. And then of course, best buddy Pokemon do have their own little perks. So yeah, I think this is really beneficial for a lot of players, specifically with the Poffins alone. And you also do not want to discount the amount of Pokeballs and items that you can get from doing AR mapping tasks. Sometimes those Pokeballs are actually quite substantial. Like, there are going to be AR mapping tasks that are going to give you 10 regular Pokeballs. That's essentially 3 or 4 spins of a Pokestop. So I really do think that is something that players should not ignore, especially if they're using something like a Pokemon GO++. They're going to run out of Pokeballs quite often, but if you're constantly doing AR mapping tasks, you could continuously have a stock of Pokeballs so that you can continuously catch Pokemon. That is definitely something you should not ignore. And then, a lot of players may not be aware of this, but if a particular Pokestop gets scanned multiple times, you're also going to get additional bonuses with that specific Pokestop. So, if you happen to have yourself a home Pokestop or a Pokestop at your workplace, if you were to do about 5 scans, you're going to get additional items from that Pokestop every time you spin it. And if you do 10 AR mapping tasks in that specific Pokestop, you're actually going to get additional buddy hearts every time you spin that Pokestop. Actually, I think it's 1 per buddy. And then, if you were to do even more, scan up to 25 times, you're actually going to get yourself bonus Pokemon spawns. And some of those Pokemon tend to be quite rare because it's its own spawn pool. So yeah, I think these are some of the advantages to doing AR mapping tasks. And again, if you happen to have yourself a home Pokestop or a office Pokestop, then you should be doing AR mapping tasks with that Pokestop so that you can get those additional rewards. Alright, and finally, let's talk about some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to AR mapping. Obviously, the biggest thing you should not do is do AR mapping tasks in your car while driving. This is actually something that I've seen some players do. They'll actually pull up to a Pokestop with an AR mapping tasks within their car. They'll park illegally, or they'll park in a way that's going to be disruptive for other people, and then they'll just do a very weak scan of that Pokestop and try to get the rewards. I can understand that it is going to be a lot more efficient and it's going to be a lot more convenient doing it that way, but I think for the safety of yourself and others, you should avoid ever doing that, especially because it could be a way for Pokemon Go to catch some unnecessary controversy with some car accidents and some unsafe behavior from players. So again, refrain from ever doing AR mapping tasks from your car, even though it can be quite tempting with all the convenience and efficiency that comes with that. Now, another thing you should not do, and this is going to mitigate one of those controversies that I mentioned earlier, but avoid doing AR mapping tasks when there is a lot of people around you. I think one of the best practices is to choose Pokestops where it's going to be a little bit more remote and it's not going to be something that's going to be filled with a lot of people. I would avoid places like playgrounds and parks, but instead go to places like a statue or maybe some sort of landmark where maybe you could utilize the amount of people around you, because then it looks like you're a tourist taking a picture of that landmark. I really do not know what you could do, but I really do think you have to practice a lot of discretion. You do not want to look like someone who's going around taking pictures of strangers or shooting a video of strangers, and then you have to explain yourself that you're actually doing something in a game that's for rewards. It's just gonna look all very messy. So just try to avoid those situations. Just make sure you're not scanning a bunch of people within that landmark, and make sure you're going to places where you're going to have a very safe and a very not awkward scan. I think that's the best thing you could do. And this is another thing that I've seen a lot of players do, and I think you should not do it for the specific reason that you could lose your privilege in doing AR mapping tasks, and that is to just simply cover your phone camera so that you can get a quick scan. Yes, this is something that some players do. They want to collect the rewards from the AR mapping task, but they do not want to sit there and just scan that Pokestop. So what they do is that they just simply cover their phone, and that's actually going to cause them to seem like they're moving, and they're going to be able to collect the reward. I would refrain from doing this specifically because I've seen a lot of people report that they've actually lost their privilege of doing AR mapping tasks, and they could no longer collect poffins and different things like that. So if you want to avoid that situation, I would just say simply spend the extra 10 seconds, get a really good scan of that Pokestop, and then you're going to be able to collect the rewards without ever worrying about losing that privilege. And then finally, this is actually a tip that I've utilized quite often, but maybe you could save all of your AR scanning for when you have a community day. The reason why I say that is because every single community day, and this is something that players may not be aware of, but every single AR mapping task is actually going to give you rare candies, and it's only specifically during community days. So if you want to get rare candies and stock up on that, that is actually a great way for you to do it, just doing a whole bunch of AR mapping tasks whenever there is a community day. So yeah, overall, I think AR mapping tasks are something in Pokemon Go that is quite underrated. A lot of players avoid doing AR mapping tasks, specifically for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, but I think at this point, you really should not ignore the amount of rewards that you can get. On a typical day, I will do about maybe 5 or 6 AR mapping tasks, pick up maybe 3 or 4 Poffins and a couple of Pokeballs, and that has actually kept me engaged with the Buddy Adventure system. And like I've said in previous videos, the Buddy Adventure system is actually one of the ways that I've stayed interested in Pokemon Go. So I think Poffins are definitely a great reward, but there's definitely more they could do, and they should definitely mitigate some of the awkward situations that players could get themselves into with AR mapping tasks. But yeah, that's essentially all I really wanted to cover regarding AR mapping tasks. I know this is going to be one of those videos where some players just simply will not care about it, or some people might find it interesting and find that this is a new aspect of Pokemon Go that they're now rediscovering. I really do not know, but if you have any thoughts regarding AR mapping tasks, definitely share them in the comments below. I would like to know what you think regarding them, what you think Niantic could do to improve them, and just in general, whether or not they should still be in the game. I would definitely like to hear your opinions. Make sure you share them in the comments, and let's have a great discussion. And thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it to be helpful. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if it's your first time here, and also don't forget that notification bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And real quick, let me give a shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Jinsula channel, the best way you can do that is always going to be by joining my Patreon. And if you decide to become a paid Patreon member, I'm going to personally add you to my Pokemon Go friends list. So that means for stuff like remote raids, the friendship system, opening and sending gifts, different things like that. If you want to play Pokemon Go with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. I'll put a link to it in the description below. And as always, if you want to support my channel in a completely different way, you could do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula. I'm on the platforms you see right now on the bottom of your screen. Make sure you go over there and give me a follow, and that'll be a huge help to my channel, and you'll have access to some exclusive content. And that's going to be it for this video. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself today, and I'll catch you all later.